Let's go for it!
Hey there, everybody. It's me, your buddy Dave, the host here at The Dark Stuff. Thanks a lot for checking out my new video, first one of 2021. And I'm going to try something different here. I'm going to do a artist's catalog ranking, which have been done before by other people, of course, you know. But I'm trying to pick out some bands that I haven't seen other people do rankings for. Some bands that I feel have maybe been overlooked a little bit here in the VC. So I'm going to start off with ranking the albums from punk rock legends Hüsker Dü. Now, Hüsker Dü are one of my favorite bands of all time. The Minneapolis Trio is one of the most influential bands in rock history. They're the Beatles of punk rock. They started at one thing, one sound, and by 6-7 years later, they were completely transformed into this, you know, completely other band, just as awesome. You know what I mean? So I feel like this is a band whose catalog should possibly be ranked. Now, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to do a couple of things. Ordinarily, I'm not going to include live albums. And in this case, I'm not going to include the band's live album. There it is, The Living End, right behind me. You can see it on the wall there. That one's signed by Greg Norton, by the way. I'm not going to include that one. But I am going to include the album, the Hüsker Dü's album, Landspeed record, which was their debut, which is a live recording. And the distinction that I'm going to make between a live album and a live recording is that, you know, this was their debut. And not too many bands have a debut of a live album. I mean, I could think of two, Hüsker Dü and MC5. And perhaps there's a handful of others. But for the most part, bands just don't do that. I decided to include Metal Circus as an album, even though it's always been marketed and considered to be an EP, because the Metal Circus is 18 minutes long, and Everything Falls Apart, which is considered the band's first proper studio album, is 19 minutes. That's considered an album, and 18 minutes is considered an EP. So I just decided Metal Circus is going to be a full-length record, too. Okay, let's start. So coming in at number 8 is the band's debut, Landspeed record. Okay. Recorded in September 1981, released at the first part of 1982. It is the band's introduction to the world, released on New Alliance Records, which was run by Mike Watt of SST. Or I'm sorry, of not of SST, of the Minutemen, who their records were on SST. Most of this record, for the entire time that I've been a fan of Hüsker Dü, which is going on over 3 decades, I've just never really gotten into this record. It is extreme, super fast, screaming hardcore. There are great songs underneath all that noise and ferocity, and you can find that on the box set Savage Young Do, which you can hear a lot of those songs in earlier slowed down forms. And in fact, this cover here, this is the version from the Savage Young Do box set. The artwork is slightly different on the original. You know, I got this in the early 90s, and the CD that SST has, they just put it into 2 tracks, which makes it really difficult to even distinguish the differences between songs. All 3 guys sing on this record, write on this record. I oftentimes can't even tell who's singing at one time because it's really just sort of screaming. So it's never been my favorite Hüsker Dü record. I respect the energy. I appreciate the playing. These guys were just monster players even back then. The only song that really stands out for me is the final song, Data Control. Great tune by Grant Hart. But they also were doing it on their final tour, and it's on that Living End album, and it's really good on that. So I would say, save your your ears and just sort of, you can ignore Landspeed record and start with Hüsker Dü at the next record. The number 7 spot belongs to Everything Falls Apart. Now, this is considered the band's first album by many. It is their first studio album. It was released on their own label, Reflex Records. It's 12 songs in 19 minutes. It's mostly blazing hardcore. A couple of songs from Landspeed record were now recorded in studio form on this one. Most of Bob's contributions on this record are the hardcore, the screamers, except for Everything Falls Apart, the title cut, which is amazing. And the song Gravity at the end is also quite good, and it features really, really good guitar on that one. So, Grant, on the other hand, was starting to expand the map a little bit and change the sound, at least for his songs. They do a cover of Sunshine Superman by Donovan, which is not very hardcore. Great cover, by the way. And then Grant has a song called Wheels, which is just, it's slightly slowed down, not too much, but it's just a ferocious song, but has a lot more melody and just it's hints of what was going to come from Hüsker Dü. And by the way, there is an expanded version of this on CD that came out in the 90s on Rhino that includes the full album and the band's 2 or 3 earliest singles on here. So I don't even know if this is still in print, frankly, but this was a good thing to get. Moving along to number 6, I am including Metal Circus. As we discussed, don't at me. This is going to be an album. This is their number 6 album. Came out in 1983. It was their first recording for SST. It's only 7 songs, but they're getting a little bit longer now, so it took a whole 18 minutes to get the record there. It is a serious upgrade in production. The sound of the instruments is so much better on this one. It's their start of working with Spot, who is the SST sort of in-house producer guy. Bob's guitar sounds just amazing on this one. Bob is still largely in hardcore mode. Songs like Real World and Deadly Skies are still pretty much the angry, fast punk rock that Hüsker Dü has largely been known for. Grant Hart, is continuing in the melodic direction. So on this one, he starts off with It's Not Funny Anymore, which is a great reflection on what was going on, punk rock politics and everything in the scene. But it's also slower and extremely catchy, and the biggest hint yet of what Hüsker Dü would later become. Diane on side B on the record is a slow, dirgy, dark song that's about a girl who had been kidnapped, a real-life girl who Grant had seen on a milk carton, who was kidnapped and murdered, and he writes a song about the event, and it's an amazing song, and Hüsker Dü played it all the way till the end. But, man, it eventually took a toll on Grant, and he stopped performing it because it was just kind of so dark. Out on a Limb is the closer. Amazing fucking tune. The playing is just unbelievably exceptional. The knock on punk rock is that the people don't know how to play, and that's the style you go into if you don't know what you're doing. Well, that's a stupid stereotype anyways, but it's especially not true with Hüsker Dü because these guys, Grant, Greg, Bob, were all phenomenal musicians. The Out on a Limb closes the record, and it closes with some great guitar freak-out stuff from Bob Mould. It's very like free jazz or even like Greg Ginn style freakouts. I know Bob was heavily influenced by the Jealous Again record from Black Flag. That was sort of what turned his mind toward hardcore, and here he does some Greg Ginn style freakouts on the guitar, and it's just fucking awesome. So Metal Circus is the number 6 one. The number 5 position belongs to Warehouse Songs and Stories from 1987. It's a double album. It was the band's final album. And it is a great record. Songwriting-wise, I think Bob Mould really brought his A game on this one. Grant had some great songs for sure, but maybe I would give him, say he was at his B+ game, on this one. Bob really brought it here with songs like These Important Years, Standing in the Rain, Ice Cold Ice, Could You Be the One, Bed of Nails, Turn It Around, Up in the Air, lots and lots of great songs. Grant also brought some great tunes along, but I also think he brought some clunkers, because I really have never liked You're a Soldier or Too Much Spice. I think that those are just weak tunes. He's done so much better. His other songs, though, like Charity, Chastity, Prudence, and Hope, Back from Somewhere, She's a Woman and He's a Man, and especially the album closer, You Can Live at Home, shows that he was way more than capable of coming up with, great songs that could work inside Hüsker Dü. The last one there that I mentioned, You Can Live at Home, is a 5.5-minute jam that, the most of the song kind of fades by about 2-3 minutes into it, and the rest of it is just the band wailing and stuff for the rest of the track. I've heard that the song actually goes for like 15 or 20 minutes of that rocking, but they just sort of put it down to 5 minutes, because that's reasonable for a major label record. So for the most part, the writing wasn't really the problem. The production and the sound of this record is the problem. It's got this really, really weird, samey, trebly, tinny production that is not just a product of the 80s. There was a lot of that in the 80s, of really thin drum sounds and just thin sounding records, lots of treble, not much bass. But that was this, but this was like times 10. It just has a very bizarre sound. Some people have attributed it to the fact that Bob, Mould, and Grant Hart, who were the producers, were losing their hearing, and it sounded fine to them. I don't know how true that is, but to me, that has always been what's held this record back. Yeah, there's a clunker or two, but you got 20 songs, so it's okay. Really, what holds it back for me is the production. That's what keeps this one at number 5, Warehouse. The number 4 spot goes to Candy Apple Grey, Hüsker Dü's major label debut on Warner Brothers in 1986. This album was largely sort of a clone of the previous record, Flip Your Wig. Flip Your Wig, the band blew up after that. They got their Warner Brothers contract. They were on fire. They were the kings of the indie scene at that point. And in a lot of ways, Candy Apple Grey was sort of an attempt to duplicate that, but the results didn't turn out quite as good. Now, I will say it's their best sounding album from an engineering perspective, recorded at the same studio as Flip Your Wig with the same engineer and Bob and Grant as the producers, but it just came out a lot better. Maybe some of that major label dough for the mixing or the mastering or whatever. Whereas, Warehouse was really a tour de force for Bob Mould in terms of his songwriting. Bob, I don't think, had his A game on this one. He certainly did for Flip Your Wig, and I think he didn't have as many good songs for Candy Apple Grey, so Grant definitely filled in the gap, and this was his A game on Candy Apple Grey. The two main singles from this record were both Grant Hart songs, Don't Want to Know If You're Lonely and Sorry Somehow. Excellent tunes. Grant's songs Dead Set and Destruction is a fantastic song that the band never played, and I kind of wish would have been emphasized more. A great one. And then No Promise Have I Made, which is something almost of a solo track from Grant Hart. And Mould has his sort of solo track with Too Far Down earlier in the record. For some bizarre reason, they decide to open the record with a real sort of rager, borderline hardcore song called Crystal. It's a Bob Mould track. He's screaming the lyrics. It's cool, but it seems really out of place once you've heard the rest of the record. And it's almost like this is the band sort of saying, hey, we went to a major label, but we didn't sell out. Look, we can fucking rock it or whatever. Like I said, Mould's writing was a mixed bag on this one. I Don't Know For Sure is pretty much exactly the same song as Makes No Sense At All. Bob has two really, really sad downer tracks on the album, Too Far Down and Hardly Getting Over It, and they're placed right next to each other. So, wow, you're getting like 10 minutes of just tearjerker music. And then they get right back into the rock with Dead Set on Destruction. So it's paced in a strange way, but I don't know. I've always known it this way, and I love the record. And despite its a couple of flaws, it still finds its way to be number 4. Okay, the number 3 spot belongs to the band's 1984 double album, Zen Arcade. It's considered by many critics and fans to be their best ever. I obviously have it at number 3, so I don't consider it to be their best ever, but it's pretty close to their best ever. This album is vaguely a concept album. It's sort of about a kid with a troubled home life who leaves home and goes out into the world and finds out that it's much, much worse out there than it was for him in his shitty home life. So it's kind of a dark album, but it is really phenomenal. The band did 25 tracks recorded in 40 hours. They did it almost entirely on first take, okay, except for 2 songs where they had to start over. And Grant Hart was supposedly on 3 hits of acid the entire time they were recording this album. And the speed and the ferocity and the intensity of the way they play on this record, that seems so unbelievable that you could be that high and still perform at that, level. So, like I said, it is a double album. The first album is mostly Mould and a lot of hardcore on the record. Starts off with Something I Learned Today. Amazing song. It's got Broken Home, Broken Heart. It's setting up the story of the album. You get an acoustic track from Grant Hart with Never Talking to You Again, and then it's right back into the rockers, Chartered Trips. And after that, which is briefly a melodic period, they go into the extreme part, okay? So you hear songs like Indecision Time, Beyond the Threshold, Pride, I'll Never Forget You. These are all Mould tracks that are just screamers, they're less than 2 minutes. They're super ferocious, super fast. Probably the most ferocious sounding stuff, even more so than Landspeed record, because it's a little more focused and they're actually a better band here 3 years later than they were when they made Landspeed record. I prefer as the record moves on a little bit and Grant Hart starts interchanging some songs in there. He's got What's Going On, Masochism World, Pink Turns to Blue, which is one of the best songs that Hüsker Dü ever did. I would say Turn on the News, amazing track from Grant Hart. Bob then gets into the game with some more melodic tracks. They're still very, very heavy with Newest Industry and Whatever, and I think those are most of the tracks. Anyways, the playing is amazing. The songwriting is amazing. I could nitpick and say songs like Hare Krishna, what's the point of that being on there? Or, do you really need a 14-minute instrumental freak-out jam at the end? I don't know. Maybe you do. But there's no point to really quibble on that. I mean, it stands as a statement, Zen Arcade. There's no need to fuck with it at all in any way. Okay, we're down to just 2, and the number 2 spot belongs to their first album from 1985. They released 2 albums in 1985. The first one was New Day Rising, actually recorded in 1984, not that long after Zen Arcade came out. It's the last album where they had to work with Spot, the SST producer. It has a super heavy, fuzzed out sound. This is the last remnants of Hüsker Dü having any hardcore in their sound. Some songs towards the end of the record still keep some of that element. When you hear songs like What You Drinkin', 59 Times the Pain, stuff like that, it still has that element, but in terms of Grant Hart's contributions, he had completely moved beyond that, Of those hardcore songs, I would say the best is like Plans I Make, which is the one at the end. It's just super extreme, borderline metal, and Mould is just off the fucking rails on that one. Another sort of guitar freak out at the end, a la Out on a Limb that we discussed in the Metal Circus record. Again, kind of Greg Ginn, kind of free jazz, kind of like heavy metal on certain parts. It's just awesome. But that's the song that closes it. We know Bob likes to do some guitar freakouts at the end of Hüsker Dü records. So the band did slow down on a lot of tracks, both Bob Mould and Grant Hart writing some of the best songs of their entire career. This album was pretty important to me, as I named my radio show, which I've been doing for 16 years, New Day Rising, based on this album and song. Other notable tracks on the record are just among Hüsker Dü's best: Girl Who Lives on Heaven Hill, I Apologize, Celebrated Summer, Terms of Psychic Warfare, Power Line, one of the most unique songs that they ever did musically, Books About UFOs, and then, of course, Plans I Make that I mentioned at the end. Excellent record, super ferocious. And my number one album in ranking the Hüsker Dü catalog is Flip Your Wig, the second album from 1985. Now, this is just recorded just a few months after doing the New Day Rising album. They've shed Spot as a producer, but they produced themselves, Bob and Grant, and they recorded in the same studio with the same engineer, but the results are very different. This is a full-blown power pop record. It still has the blazing guitars from Bob Mould. It still has the ferocious drumming from Grant Hart. The songs are still very revved up, but there is no element of hardcore left in the band. It is just ferocious power pop. Great, great stuff. Both Bob and Grant writing literally their best songs ever. Flip Your Wig, Everything, Makes No Sense at All was the big hit off that one. Hate Paper Doll, Green Eyes, Divide and Conquer, Flexible Flyer, Private Plane, Keep Hanging On. Just, you know, in theory, hit after hit after hit. Great, great songs. The production is, tinny and trebly, but not in a way like Warehouse where it's samey and boring. This just seems more an element of the 80s. Like, this was the 80s kind of production. And if you listen to some Ramones records from this period, their drums sort of sounded the way Grant's do. And I think it was just something that was going around at that time. So there feels like there's more intent to it. If I had to make a complaint about the album, I would say that I don't understand why the last two songs are there. The last two songs, The Wit and the Wisdom and Don't Know Yet, are both instrumentals. And it's hard to say whether they are intentional instrumentals or they were meant to be like turned into a song, or maybe they just didn't finish it or something. But Keep Hanging On is such a great closer. Just the way the song is, the message behind it, the vocal performance from Grant Hart, the whole thing is great. And there's really no need to, it should have been the end of the album. But yet there's two other songs, and those two songs don't suck. They're cool, but it just seems out of place, and maybe those could have been like later released bonus tracks or something, and then close the album, 12 cuts, Keep Hanging On, and then it would have been flawless. As it is, it's like a 9.9 out of 10. I mean, I'm hardly going to quibble with too much music, you know what I'm saying? So there you go. There's the ranking of Hüsker Dü. I'd appreciate a comment if you have anything to say, if you disagree, whatever. If you've got any suggestions for other artists, I'm already making a list, guys, and we'll be doing these. I'm not going to promise any type of schedule, but I'm going to try to do them more frequently. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.